Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal Based Dad podcast. This is the show where, between my guest interviews with subject matter experts and topic specific deep dives, the aim is to arm you with actionable insights and information on how to prioritize your metabolic health and improve your overall health and well being. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal Based Dad podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Duplessis. I have invited the fantastic Neill Friedman back for a deep dive series. Neill's episode, where he joined us a few weeks back, was absolutely fantastic, very well received. And given his knowledge area and expertise, and the fact that he is a bona fide metabolic health scientist, and not just a layman talking about it, he's got a wealth of information to share, so I've invited him back on to talk us through a series of topic-specific episodes and hopefully convey some valuable information to you, the general public. So Neill, welcome back to the show, sir.
Hi, Ricky. Thanks very much for having me back.
You're most welcome.
Good to be here.
Most welcome. So I wonder if you might just take us through. We won't do a bio because we've got your episode. If the audience would like to see your bio and who you are and what you're about, they can go a couple of episodes back and watch that episode. It was fantastic. But I wonder if you might just give a overview of what you want to talk about in this first episode of your deep dive series.
Okay, I'm quite happy to do that. So, weirdly enough, I think the title you've given to these, the deep dive, is exactly the opposite of what we want to do with this. I was originally going to turn around and say what we're going to do is take a deep dive into the shallow end, and then I just realized that's really dangerous. So we're not going to do that. What I really want to do is, and maybe you've teased me up when you brought me up here with probably the one thing that maybe scares people away that I want to get around, which is that you build me as a scientist. And I think the whole point of these 4 series is that I actually want to try and strip the science away from health messaging, because I think sometimes it's confusing. I think sometimes it's scary. And one of the habits that all of us in the science industry tend to do is we tend to, even when we think we're not, we get very sciencey about things, which is great if you want that sort of deep level of science. But if you're just trying to work out how to be a little bit healthier, how to do something simple, I'm going to say affordable. When I say affordable, I'm talking about it from an energy perspective. And I'm going to talk more about that as we go through this episode, rather than from a financial perspective. To be able to improve our, I'm going to say, metabolic health, and there's again me getting sciencey without even thinking about it, but to improve our health and well-being and the way we go through our lives. So yeah, it's going to be a series we're calling a deep dive, but really what I want to do is skim the surface where all the really good stuff sits. All right, because what we'll talk about as we go through is that there's so much science messaging, there's so much health messaging, but most of it.
This episode is brought to you by my work as a Zinzino independent partner. To find out more about Zinzino and their pioneering work in test-based personalized nutrition and how this can help you take the guesswork out of your personal health journey, please have a look at the episode description and complete the short survey linked therein. This episode is also brought to you by my new tech startup, Biosim Technologies. At Biosim Technologies, we are creating intelligent, technology-driven solutions for human metabolic health, empowering individuals to embrace a biology-first approach to their lifestyle, health, and wellness. To keep up to date with our progress at Biosim Technologies, please look at the episode description and join our mailing list, where you will receive periodic updates on the exciting things that we have underway.
Really delves into the complicated stuff. And it scares people. It puts people off, at least people with a bad understanding. But also, that complicated stuff doesn't really work until the basics are in place.
Yes. 100%.
And I think that the messaging out there, and I can understand why that is, and I'll talk about that in a few moments, really comes up with the complicated stuff, and it doesn't give people the scope to understand and do the basics first. Because
Yeah.
things like nutrient timing and exactly when you should eat your protein and not eat your protein, etc., which it might be really valuable if you're a bodybuilder, for example. But if you're just someone looking to improve your overall health, that is complicated and unnecessary, because unless you've just got your basic eating patterns right and your basic movement patterns right, um, the rest isn't going to do anything. You're playing with what I
Yeah.
call the 1% stuff before you've got the
Yeah.
99%.
100%. So you're trying to optimize the 1% without having the 99% in place first. Yeah.
So with our deep dive, and we're just going to really try and focus on some really simple messaging. So in terms of improving health, we are going to focus for the 4 episodes that we're going to talk about here on 3 things: nutrition, physical activity, and recovery. And we're going to cover that over the 4 episodes. But with each of those 3 things, we will provide in our conversation no more than 3 basic interventions, or 3 basic things that you can do for
Okay.
each that'll have that could make or will make a fundamental difference to your health span. And
Yeah.
what we would like you to do, you the listener, or what we would advise you to do, is if you can take one of those 3 things for each of nutrition, physical activity, and recovery, and find a way within your lifestyle to implement just one thing for each of those. So yeah, we think that'll make a fundamental difference. So we hope that at the end of the 4 series you will have a 9x9 grid.
Mhm.
3 nutrition interventions, 3 physical activity interventions, 3 recovery interventions, and if you can pick one from each of one from each of those, we think you've got a really good starting point. That's going to be simple for the audience to do. That'll have a marked and measurable improvement to their lives.
Awesome. Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. So
Right.
I just want to reframe one small part of that, because I think you're absolutely right, but you're selling yourself short slightly. Right? So rather than just skimming the surface, what you're actually doing is you're taking the breadth of the body of information, you're distilling it down to the practical, simple applications. Yeah, because it's not something that someone without your depth of knowledge would easily be able to do, because like you say, it's confusing, and there's also a lot of conflicting messaging out there. There's a lot of conflicting information, and I don't think that the layman would be able to just skim the surface and walk away with stuff that's actually going to make that much of a difference. I think your knowledge of the underpinning areas, the science, as it were, is paramount to being able to distill this down into the practical steps that you want to deliver.
So when we designed or discussed the framework for this deep dive, I kind of put a paragraph of notes, which I'm actually going to read directly from my notes, because
Cool.
it's kind of what we agreed would be our aim and objective of this deep dive series. So we said that most importantly, our hope is that we will leave you, the listener, with a set of new skills that will allow you to be in the best position to make sense of all the messaging that you are presented with, so that each person can make sense of the chaos, which is why in this first episode of this first series, we're going to really be focusing on some basic rules with regards to critically evaluating all the health messaging that's out there, and putting that into perspective. And we'll put a lot more emphasis into our second episode. But that's really, I think, our aim and objective of what we're doing with this series. All right.
Yeah.
And I think to understand, or just to put something into perspective, when your audience says, okay, so we see Neill, we've read the bio, he's a bioenergeticist, he studies mitochondria and all this heavy sciencey stuff that's starting to scare us off already. What's that got to do with the 3 topics that we spoke about? And actually, I just want to put this down to very simple. What we're actually going to be talking about across everything here is energy. All right.
Yes.
So bioenergetics, what I study, mitochondria, is all about cellular energy. But if you just think about our three broad topics, nutrition is essentially about energy supply into the organism, which is us. Physical activity is how we expend and utilize that energy. And then recovery and maintenance is how we recharge that energy battery, so that we can match our supply and demand in order to be able to go again. So really all we're going to be talking about is energy. But that is actually a bit more than just the energy in terms of what we're talking about from a nutrition perspective, because it's also about managing how you utilize your energy as a person to be able to get involved in this in the first place, right? So when you look at pretty much every excuse that I've heard, and I'm sure, Ricky, you've heard them all, and I'm sure we've all
I've
not
probably
only heard
used
them, but
most of
used them
them.
ourselves, about why we don't go to the gym, or why we don't um, eat properly or shop properly, or all of these things, exercise, run, walk, do the garden, whatever it might be. If you distill any of those excuses down, and they're all excuses, and I'm as guilty as anybody else of making them at times. It's normally I haven't got the time. My kids require too much of my attention. My work life is too busy. But if you actually just strip all of that down, it's actually all just the same excuse. I don't have the energy to do it. All right.
Yes. Yeah.
And we need to understand that that idea that or that belief that we have, that we don't have the energy to do it, is actually grounded in all the stuff that we're going to talk about, because it's not just the psychological idea, oh, I'm tired, I haven't got the energy. It's actually, I don't have the energy. Your body's managing its energy systems, and it's telling you you don't have the energy. That manifests as I don't have the time, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit, I think, in this first episode, in our first structure, about how do you reorganize that? How do you rearrange that? All right. And
Okay. Yeah.
I think our starting point in our structure is, we said, we're trying to look at what actually works, and why we sometimes avoid things. And um, I think you put this heading down, or you simplified our previous discussion really nicely. You said simplicity does not equal stupidity.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great thing, because we're going to try and be simple here. But actually, that idea is not as simple or as stupid as you might think. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an experience here, because there's an idea, is why is it out there? Why is some of this messaging so complicated? And it's because people need to justify what they're offering if they're going to be charging you for it, right? So if
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
charge you a whole lot of money and say, right, now that I've got your money in my pocket, my advice is that you need to go for a 5-mile walk 3 times a week. That's probably really great advice. And in terms of your long-term health, it's probably worth whatever you paid. But you're not going to feel like that. You're going to think I've just been ripped off, right?
Yeah.
So basically, the person offering that advice needs to complicate the message. He needs to delve deeply into the science. Um, And there's another side to that as well. So let me share a little bit of an anecdote. So when I first started my nutrition shop, this is before I started my degree and everything, I had a little supplement shop, and I wanted to take my nutrition knowledge that I had and offer people nutrition plans. But and I wanted to base those on the evidence, on the science, but also I wanted to base it on the lifestyle and nutrition changes that I'd made for myself. But I wasn't really super confident about whether what I knew would actually really work for other people. So when I started offering nutrition plans, I just wanted to get a feel for it. I started selling people a 6-week nutrition plan for 10 quid, right? Just because I didn't know myself whether I actually knew what the heck I was talking about. All right. Um, I don't do it now full time, but I do try to supplement a bit of my income. I'm still offering nutrition plans, but now I charge about £380 for a 6-week nutrition plan. But here's a really weird thing. Although my knowledge is greater and the way I present it is much more detailed and is much better, the basics of how I designed a nutrition plan and the effort that I put into it is pretty much the same. When I handed out nutrition plans for 10 quid, 20 quid, 50 quid, as it slowly went up, less than 90% of my customer base adhered to the plan for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Today, when I sell a nutrition plan for 380 odd pounds, I'd say I get a 95, 97% rate of adhering, people actually trying to follow or following the plan. Right?
Why would you say that is?
And
Though?
what that's about is how we as individuals value something, right?
Okay.
So the guy that got the plan for me for 10 quid, in his head, that plan was worth 10 quid. If he didn't stick to it, and there was no reason for doing that, he just ditched it. He didn't waste he'd wasted 10 quid, right? If a guy comes to me today and asks me to put a plan together for him and I charge him 380 quid, but 380 quid's a decent amount of money, they're far more likely to stick to the plan because they've invested in it.
Yeah, they've got a stake in it.
They've got a stake in it. So we're not going to do the opposite of that, right? In this particular series, we're going to offer some really simple, basic advice, and we're not charging anybody for it. So the point that I'm trying to make is we need to find a way to value our health and place a value on something that isn't just how much it cost us from a financial perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think a good way for people to frame that in their minds, and I've spoken about this a little bit before, but I've experienced this myself, and I think most people will be able to relate to it. Like, you're absolutely right. People don't like to pay for stuff that's going to make them healthy because the stuff that really moves the needle and does 80% of the work in terms of correcting and sort of getting you back onto the track for optimal health, it's really basic, simple stuff. It's not complicated. It's not hard. It's more about realignment than it is trying to do anything fancy. And so it gives off this air of, oh, but all I have to do is that. But you're charging me that much for it. A better way to view that is to think about how central your health is to everything. Your job, your marriage, your life, your family, your hobbies, your enjoyments. All of these things that make you you and that get you out of bed in the morning and that you enjoy doing. Your health is central to the enablement of all of that, because the second your health fails and truly fails, everything else becomes secondary to your failing health. And suddenly you don't have the ability to do your job anymore. You aren't there for your family because you physically can't be doing things that you want to be doing with them. Your marriage starts to suffer. Your health is central to everything. So that upfront investment, whilst it doesn't seem like the method matches the cost, a better way to frame it in my mind, at least, the way I like to think about it is, if my health fails, it's going to cost me so much more. And that justifies for me the investment upfront.
Yeah, absolutely. But that investment is, and also what I agree with you, but I want people to understand that actually the biggest investment is an energy investment.
Yeah.
So while we are not asking anyone listening to this to pay for the podcast, although I know you'd like people to subscribe to your podcast.
Subscriptions are free.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So there we go. All right. But we are saying to people that if you want to change your life, you do need to invest.
Yes.
But that investment is your energy. And that is, for some people, for most people, I would say, a much bigger and harder investment to make. So I've said to you this episode's all about energy, but everything's all about energy. I'm going to just quickly cover 2 quick points, and then I'm going to really deep dive a little bit into energy. So we talk about metabolic health a lot. So I think it's probably worth just telling to people, what do we mean by metabolism? Because just very, very basic, without getting deep into science, the definition of metabolism is it's the set of chemical reactions that occur within all living things to maintain life. That's metabolism.
Cool.
It's a whole combination of chemical processes that keep you alive. All right.
Yeah.
And here's a key point: human health is built upon a well-functioning metabolism, and that is defined as the ability to change oxygen and nutrients into the energy that fuels life. So
Yes.
everything that we're going to be talking about is about that. So as a starting point, as I said to you, we're going to be talking through all these 4 episodes: nutrition, physical activity, recovery, and I've said to you it's all about energy. So I think a good starting point then is just to tell everybody that and why we talk about this investment in energy. And this is about goal settings, about changes, but just understand that our bodies have 3 key blocks of energy use. I'm trying to put it into really simple blocks of energy use. So, and they have different levels of importance. So the first block of energy use, the first thing that requires energy from us, is the energy that keeps our heart, our brain, and our organs functioning. All right. Our bodies have determined the amount of energy required for those things to happen in order to sustain life at the barest level. And the energy set aside to cover those things is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
All right. Within our body, a certain amount of our total energy availability is reserved, it's kept aside to do that. It's to keep us alive at the barest minimum, organs, heart, brain functioning.
Yeah.
Right? So your body will scavenge energy from anywhere else if it feels that those things are at risk, right? Because that is that can't be compromised.
Yeah.
The second block of energy that we utilize are things that we need to function and that we don't have control over, but which our body can make some compromises on. All right.
Okay.
So things like the amount of energy required to digest food. So when you eat something, an amount of energy is required to digest what you're eating, right? In order to break it up and turn it into fuel. You can't control that. When you eat something, you can't control how much energy is used.
Yeah, no, you're not
but your
thinking
body,
produce enzymes.
yeah, but your body can regulate that, right? So if it thinks you're very, very low on energy and it wants to preserve energy for the basic functions in group 1, it can downregulate your desire to eat, right? Now, that's very counterproductive because you need the fuel ultimately.
Yeah.
But potentially you can downregulate the requirement to eat. We don't see this from a healthy perspective in humans, but of course, there's a great example of this is animals that hibernate, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Remove all their energy resource to the requirements to keep them alive while they're hibernating through the winter. And one of the ways it does that is they're not eating. So there's no energy required to digest
Yeah.
food. It's just the basic minimums. And the biggest way that we see that visibly in terms of a control is around things around our reproduction system. Okay. So reproduction is really important to an organism. However, it's regulated by our energy supply. So when energy supply is low, or our body perceives it to be low, it downregulates the requirement to reproduce or the ability to reproduce. That makes perfect sense when you see it in the context of when you're in a famine. That's a really bad time to raise children, right? The energy required for pregnancy, the energy required to give birth, and the energy required to healthily sustain children requires food. So we know that when the body starts to perceive a major energy deficit, for men, we see testosterone levels being scaled all the way back. All right. And we see that the sex drive, if you want, all being scaled back. And in women, we see it in terms of the reproductive system, in terms of the menstrual cycle gets switched off, right? So we see amenorrhea. Again, putting that into a nice visible context where I see this a lot, where we see this a lot within an athletics community, is women, normally at an elite level, but often below that, who are highly competitive athletes that train very hard and then undereat, particularly they undereat because there's an aesthetic component to their sport, not as part of the sport, but it's part of the expectation. So I'm thinking gymnasts, but even if you look at track and field athletes today, I mean, you look at what some of those athletes wear in the arena, right? There's an aesthetic component to some of what they're thinking about in terms of their stomachs showing they can't have a handlebar. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's that component as well. So we see amenorrhea as being a very typical thing in elite female athletes, in that their menstrual cycle stops. They stop having their monthly period. All right.
Okay.
And effectively, what all that's their body saying is that energy supply is low, matched to demand, and
Is
therefore
that
this is a
just, sorry to interrupt, but just to bring it to sort of regular, everyday world analogy. I've heard before that women with eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, stuff like that, particularly where they're underfed, they stop having their menstrual cycle, and that's why. Yes,
that's
it's
the
the
reason
body
why.
down regulating
Yeah.
that system, because the energy that is available needs to be prioritized to system one. Okay, that makes sense.
Absolutely. All right. And then, of course, when you bring back the food, that can be switched on again. So if you've suddenly gone from an environment where there's famine to feast, and now there's lots of food available, etc. Now's a great time to have a family. Right now, there's all the food available, so everything gets brought up, gets switched on. We very seldom in the Western world today live in real feast and famine environments, but we put ourselves through feast and famine environments, right? In terms of our over exercising, under eating, and the other way around, and some of the pressures we put on ourselves, etc. So, and this then affects our ability to want to do things. So if somebody's trying a typical calorie controlled diet, okay, let's say a woman who's now decide she wants to lose weight, and she's not listening to our episodes, she's following the basic calories in, calories out model, and puts herself into a massive calorie deficit because she's determined she's going to fit into exercise dress for that wedding in, in 6 months' time or whatever it is. Suddenly they've lost their sex drive, and they stop having their regular cycles. All right, that puts them in a terrible state that drains their energy. That draining of energy drains their willpower to continue with that fast. So they go back to eating, and suddenly they now see themselves as a failure because they weren't able to get into that dress size, etc. But they've set themselves up to fail, but before they've started, or that's actually the wrong choice of words. The messaging out there and the typical advice out there has set them up to fail before they've started.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good distinction to make.
Yeah. And then the third block of energy is the energy that we expend through physical activity. And that is the amount of energy, that is the energy block that we have the most control over.
Yeah,
right?
And that's not just exercise per se, but it's also non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Yeah. So moving around, doing chores, bopping your foot on the table.
But our bodies will try and regulate that, but we can override it. So there was a great metabolic study done a while back, and I didn't want to get too sciencey, but basically they just stuck a whole bunch of people in a locked-in chamber, locked-in room, and they put them in, they cut their calories down, and they monitored the air they were breathing and everything that came into them and everything that came out of them. But one of the things that they noticed was certain people are a bit like me, tend to be quite fidgety. But as soon as those people went into a big enough calorie deficit, they stopped fidgeting.
Switch it off.
Completely unknown to them, but their body started to preserve energy. All right.
That's interesting.
By saying that's unnecessary energy expenditure.
Yeah, because I sit and my leg will go all the time. Like just a habit. Like I'll bounce my leg. And
I can't sit still in a conference. I've got to doodle. I've got to draw something. It helps me to concentrate, but to do something else as well. Yeah. So our body can down regulate that. But we can override that if we choose to. All right. But we've got to be aware that when we choose to override that, we're spending currency. We're spending energy.
Yeah. It's not without cost.
It's not without cost. So that's the investment that people need to make in order to get themselves into new habits. They need to actually potentially override something within their internal system in terms of choosing where some of the energy goes and how energy gets used. And it's one of those things where things go wrong in the traditional, I'm not going to call it health model, I'm going to call it the weight loss model, because you go on a calorie deficit Yeah, you go on a calorie deficit, so you start to cut the amount you eat. What that means is that the body's going to turn around to you immediately and say, right, well, there's no energy here to exercise because that's the first thing it's going to
Mm.
switch off. Um, and so you actually stop exercising or stop moving, and then which is it's why you see people go on these calorie deficits and they lose a lot of weight in the first couple of weeks. And then although they're still eating the same smaller amount, the weight loss gets less and less and less and less, and then they hit a plateau,
The
etc.
plateau,
It's because their body's expending less energy. Their body's adjusting for the fact that
yeah,
they're eating less by expending less.
yeah. That's interesting.
So
Okay,
you
so
need to overcome that.
if we were to take those three energy groups, as it were, is it accurate to say that the body would, in the first instance, downregulate group three, but we can, through willpower, override that and still choose to persist? So, for example, if I was in a severe calorie deficit sustained over a period of time because I wanted to starve myself to fit into a pair of board shorts for the upcoming summer or something like that, to use a appropriate version of the analogy you gave earlier. My body would downregulate the amount of energy I feel that I have available for physical activity. My desire to go and work out hard would be dramatically reduced. I wouldn't feel up to it. But I could, if I was a stubborn enough bastard, override that by choice and go through it anyway.
Yes.
And that's the fundamental difference between group two, which is your non negotiable or non-controllable bodily functions, things that like digestion, things that you don't control through thought or willpower, but just happen automatically, but are less important than the vital life-sustaining ones in group one. Okay, cool. That's clear in
If
my
you just
mind.
thought about the fact if you went on a hunger strike, it's the sequence by which things would get switched off.
Yeah.
Voluntary physical activity would get switched off first. Secondary metabolic functions would get switched off second, and the last thing that would get
And then
switched
you
off are the
die.
vital functions that keep you alive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you die.
So yeah, absolutely. All
Cool.
right. So this is then when we get to the idea of how do we motivate ourselves? How do we overcome some of this fight that our body wants to make in order to almost keep us homeostatic, right? So our body, you got to remember
Well,
that as
actually,
an organ.
that I think you're about to explain what I was going to ask you to explain. So please continue.
So, okay, well, let me see if I get there. As an organism, we don't know what's healthy, all right? Our body doesn't actually know what we call a healthy weight, for example. So it assumes that the way that we've been over the last period of time, years, is the way we want to be or the way we should be. And as soon as we start to change that, our body goes into panic mode. All right.
Yes.
It thinks we're dying immediately. All right. Immediately starts to think. So when you start to go on a big calorie deficit and because you want to lose weight, your body's going, hang on a second, we're now eating less than we've eaten on a daily basis or a weekly basis for the last 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. We need to make sure that we've got the energy for group one, those vital functions, right? So we're going to try and slow everything else down. We're going to preserve energy as much as possible. We're going to make you not motivated to do exercise. Yeah, we're just really going to change this, and we're going to make you hungry. We're going to try and make you eat because we're dying. We're dying. The fact that we've got enough body storage of energy to last another lifetime, our body doesn't know that, right?
Yeah.
But we do reprogram that. Okay. Which is why it's so important for weight loss. And again, I'm talking about weight loss here, not just health, but for health as well, is that what we do is sustained. We can do it over time and it's sustainable because after a period of time, and people always say to me, what is that period of time? What's the magic number? There's no magic number. It's different for everybody. But I would say 12 months to 18 months is kind of where your body starts to reset and adjust its range, right? So I know when I lost my weight, I went from 122 kilograms down to about 111 kilograms. And then I just kept myself there for about 2 years. and then my body didn't want to creep up anymore. And then I went on then I went through my next phase, and I got myself down to 100. And again, I sat there for a while before I dropped it down to under 90, where I'm currently sitting. Right?
Nice.
So, but those periods of time in between where I worked, and then doing that means you can work less. The longer you stay at weight, the less you have to work to stay at that weight. Because the homeostatic set point changes, right? I'm trying to keep this really simple, but yeah, so that's why slow, progressive, steady weight loss becomes more maintainable, because you need to give yourself that time. You need to give your body that time to adjust.
Yes,
And
100%.
it's about managing those three systems.
So I would frame that as human physiology, the body, does not like dramatic change. And it doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative dramatic change. Dramatic change is, like you say, the body goes into panic mode. It's what the hell's happening here? Stop it now. I want to go back to how I was. And that is why incremental change over a long period of time sticks better than short dramatic change does. Most people like to diet. We're using energy as the example here for the topic today. And most people like to diet with these severe crash calorie restriction diets, because that's what mainstream advice has been pushing since the 70s, probably even earlier than that. But then you get this yo-yo effect where they may, if they have the willpower to see it through, they may hit their goal weight, but having achieved their goal, their motivation to sustain that calorie deficit will fade, and they'll get their appetite back, and their body will swing them as hard as possible straight back to where they were. And then they'll have to go on another yo-yo, and then another one, and another one, and so they yo-yo back and forth over time.
But yo-yo becomes even worse than that, because your body tries to recover. So when you yo-yo back up, you're always high. You end up higher than your starting point.
Yeah.
So you end up with a net gain in weight, right? So
Slight,
basically,
slight aside, but very interesting point that's directly relevant to that. I saw an episode by Dr. Urban Kiernan on his podcast where they were talking about the GLP-1 agonists, the Ozempic and then such. And I forget the name of the phenomena, but it actually causes the division of fat cells, causes your fat cells to replicate. So you end up with more fat cells, so more storage capacity, more storage potential than what you started
emptier, but
with.
there's more of them.
Yeah, they're empty, but there's more of them. And when you go through that rebound that you've just spoken about, you end up severely worse than what you were to start with, because you have more storage capacity to fill up, and the body fills that up.
So I love the fact that we see patterns in everything, all right? And everything with biologically, there's a pattern. So if you just think about what a person does in the gym when they want to build more muscle, and I use this analogy a lot, and I know I'll use it a lot through the rest of the series. You go into the gym, you break your muscles a little bit, so you put them through a bit of a hard time, and then you come out of the gym and they repair, but in their repair, they go, oh, that wasn't good. We need to be stronger than we were before, right?
Yeah.
Well, that also works the other way around. All right. You've just starved me as a body. So basically that means my energy reserve probably wasn't enough. So now that you're eating again,
so
I need to have a slightly higher reserve than I had before. So, but you're now just
Ish.
building fat mass instead of muscle mass, right? But it's the same. I was going to the same thought process, but your cells aren't thinking. But it's the same.
No, but the same basic program.
It's the same basic. It's a fractal. So I like the term fractal. So fractals is just really simple things that, when you look at a very complex thing, when you look at it, it's actually made up of simple things. And when you look at those simple things, they're made up of simple things. And it's a repeated process. All right.
Cool.
So how do we go through that? Let's be a bit practical here. So we're talking about giving people some practical tips.
Yeah.
So you made the decision in your head, I want to start getting healthier. I want to start doing something to do that. And you're going to listen to the 4 episodes of this podcast, of this deep dive, and you're going to choose your 3 things, one from each of our broad groups, and you're going to do, and you're going to want to do that. So what you want to do is you want to set yourself goals, all right? And you want to make sure that you can follow those goals, all right? So goals, if you go into Google and look at goals, I think most personal trainers, when they do a personal training course, they'll talk to you about SMART goals. I can never remember what the S
It's
stands
project
for. SMART.
management stuff.
Yeah, all right. But a SMART goal is, so a SMART goal is quite simple. It's something that is specific. That's the S. It's
Yeah,
measurable. You've got to be able
measurable.
to measure it. It's achievable,
Mhm.
and it's relevant, and it's time based. All right.
Yes, it has an
That's a
objective.
SMART goal. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time based. But there's all sorts of, if you Google goals, the others, I won't go through all the explanations, but there's fast goals and there's packed goals and there's OKR goals and there's bag
Yeah.
goals, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that with all of those is there's a key thing to all of those that's really important. The goal has to be specific. All right. So turning around and saying, I want to be healthier is not specific. Might be what you want to do,
Correct. Yeah.
but you want to try to find something, and we'll talk about these things as we go through the 4 series. You want to find a specific marker that you can say, this is it, that I'm looking at. All right. It needs to be measurable. You need to be able to count it. All right. You need to be able to see the difference. So turning around and saying, I want to increase my testosterone levels is a great leading goal, but how the hell are you going to know whether you're getting there, right? Unless you're drawing blood and doing tests once a week or whatever it is. All right. It needs to be achievable, which means it needs to fit into your lifespan. All right. And you need to give yourself some sort of a time frame in which to do it. But what none of these goal patterns talk about, and I think I mentioned this in our last podcast, is when you have a specific goal, the tendency is always to make that goal an outcome-based goal. All right.
Yes.
I'm going to fit into that trouser size or that dress size. I'm going to lose 3 kilograms. I am going to fit in whatever it is. And the problem with that is, although it's specific and it meets the SMART goal criteria, it involves so many things that are not within your control. All right. And then when you don't achieve those, people psychologically start to then go onto a back foot and say, I'm a failure. I can't do this. My friends did it, and whatever it is, I can't do it. And it's because they're measuring something that they might have some control over, but not everything. So one of my key messages. So if you want to add a few takeaway points from every one of these episodes, here's my first takeaway point from today's episode. All right. Make sure that you set goals that are process-based goals, not outcome-based goals. So set yourself something that fits the other targets. It must be something you can measure. It must be something that you can achieve, and you must put a time frame to it. But make it the process, not the outcome. So what am I talking about here? Setting yourself a goal that says, I'm going to lose 5 kilograms in 6 weeks. It has a good time frame. It's measurable, but it's outcome based. But if you turn around and say, I am going to go for a 3-kilometer walk 3 days a week, every week for the next 4 months.
Yeah.
That's a process-based goal. You're in control of that. But you also need to set that goal smartly in terms of what I'm saying is, don't turn around and say, I'm going to go for a 3-kilometer walk 7 days a week. Because then if something goes wrong on one day, suddenly you go, oh, I've missed my goal. I'm a failure, and you can't make it up. But if you say that you're going to go for a walk 3 days a week, you can go for 4, you can go for 5. But if your goal is a minimum of 3, if something happens on Monday that stops you from going for that walk, you can make it up on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a work function and a way do whatever it is, you can move within, it's manageable within your lifestyle to achieve that goal. So that goal could be across all the things that we're going to talk about through the next few episodes. So it could be going to the gym 3 days a week. It could be going for a walk 3 days a week. It could be intermittent fasting 3 days a week. So I'm going to do a 18-hour, 18-6 fast 2 days a week. That could be a nutrition goal. And we'll talk about the benefits and all of those in the other episodes and we think about. So, but that's the key takeaway to start off with in terms of getting yourself going with whatever it is that you're going to do to improve your health. Is make sure you have a process-based goal and make sure it fits in with your lifestyle. I think
Yes.
that's really, really important. It's got to be within your lifestyle, and it's got to be within your management of your energy ability. All right. So if you have kids that have to go to school and be at school at 9 o'clock every morning and have to be fetched at 3 o'clock every weekday afternoon, make sure that whatever you're setting yourself up for is not something that has to take place in or
At
around
those
those
times. Yeah.
times, right?
Yeah. That makes sense.
Because you're then going to have that. I'm going to call it the excuse, but it's the easy. It's the ease with which to not spend the energy to go. Oh well, I was going to go for a walk this morning, but if I woke up 15 minutes too late, which means I wouldn't have been finished in time to get my kids to school, so I
Yeah.
couldn't go for the walk.
I
So
find for me that's where routine is incredibly valuable, because I like routine. I went to boarding school. I just, yeah, I had that drilled into me, and it makes sense. So I wake up at the same time every day, Monday through Sunday. I have things that I do in the morning. I sort the dishes, da 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 da. So there's a set routine, including the school run and stuff. And then it varies day to day depending on what my work day looks like. But my workout, or my physical investment into my health, is done over what would be my lunchtime during the working day. Like that is my time. I block it out in my work calendar. There's an hour there. I'm out of office. I'm unavailable. That's my time, and I protect that fiercely. That's when I do my physical investment for the day, and then school run in the afternoon, back evening with the kids, family routine, all that. But just so for me, having that routine and then being fiercely protective over the routine, so far as practical, because it's not always possible to tell the boss I'm not available at lunch. Things come up at work and life gets messy, and sometimes there's stuff that happens. But as far as practical, for me, lunchtime is the thing. Like that's when I work out.
So the whole point of being able to adapt or adopt a permanent healthy lifestyle is for the interventions that you choose to become a habit.
Yeah, well,
And for
lifestyle.
me,
Yeah,
yeah, and for me, routine is the stepping stone to creating habit.
yeah,
If you create a routine and make yourself stick to that routine within a faster period than you think, that routine becomes a habit. All right.
yeah.
So I go to the gym. I wake up to go to the gym at 4:45 every morning, Monday to Friday. Right. I've been doing that now for so long. I have on occasion gone to bed at night and thought to myself, I need a bit of a break. I'm not going to the gym tomorrow. I'm turning off the alarm on my watch. You know what? 4:45 in the morning, I'm awake and I'm going to the gym because my body is just,
That's
it,
just
it
what
is
you
a
do.
habit. It's just
Yeah,
completely programmed to do that, right?
yeah.
But that wasn't how it was. Yeah, when I started my whole personal health journey, my outcome or
Mm.
my process-based goal, sorry, was I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week, 5 days, three
Yeah,
days a week for 6 months. That was the sum total of my goal. Um, But you can set your process-based goal a little bit differently, where you can kind of combine a process-based goal with an outcome. You can say, I want to be able to run 5 kilometers. Saying you want to be able to run 5 kilometers in 25 minutes, if you don't do it, is an unmanageable goal.
yeah,
But you can say, I want to go from 0 to 5 kilometers. And then you can say, right, and the way that I'm going to do that is for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to walk 1 kilometer a day. Then I'm going to up that to walking 2 kilometers a day. And then I'm going to up that to walking 3 kilometers a day or 3 days a week. Then once I'm walking regularly, I'm comfortable walking regularly 3 kilometers 3 times a week. I'm going to
mm.
now run one of those 3 kilometers. And then you build it up until you're running all
Yeah.
three. Then you add another two. So you can
No,
create that
I
and you
think
can
that
create a time span. There is,
yeah,
I'm not often one to publicly promote big government policies, but there is one government thing, resource that's available online that anybody that wants to start and is just looking for a manageable process, there's something called Couch to 5K. So if you
Yeah.
just Google Couch to 5K, it's quite literally a program that takes you day by day from getting off the couch and doing no exercise to being able to run 5 kilometers. I think it's over about a 4-month period that you follow the steps,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it
Yeah,
takes
no,
you through there.
that's pretty
And
good.
that's one of the things I can, if you don't know where to start and you don't know what you're doing, research or Google Couch to 5K and follow the Couch to 5K
Yeah.
program. Um, and that becomes your process goal. Your process goal is I'm going to follow the Couch to 5K protocol
Mm.
as it's laid out because it gives you space. It's quite a good protocol, and
So
that's a great starting goal.
yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. I love the process goal concept. I like that. So you're focusing on the what to do and making
Yes.
that the focal point rather than the what you get for it. So the what you
Yeah.
get for it, you're still going to get down the line. The reward will still come, but instead of looking at the reward saying I want that, and then getting completely flatlined by the process of trying to get from A to B, you're focused on the process of getting from A to B and then doing the actual thing.
What you're doing is you're redefining what you term as success. All right.
Yeah.
So if you deem success to be losing 10 kilograms in 6 weeks, you're going to always see yourself as being non-successful because your chances of doing that are very bad.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah. Sort of cutting a leg off, like.
And the same applies. So some people might not be thinking, maybe you people within your audience, okay, have a business background and a business thinking or an entrepreneurial thinking, whatever it is. And these two things kind of match up. So one of the biggest routes to being unsuccessful when planning um, your own successful lifestyle is what you deem a success. So unfortunately, many people growing up today deem money as a success. I'm
Mm.
going to have a Lamborghini by the time I'm 25. I'm going to, you know what I mean? So basically, they see financial wealth as the measurement of being successful.
Yeah.
Whereas the truth about being good at a business is that financial wealth is actually a byproduct of being successful.
Yes,
All right.
100%.
Making your business sustainable, being able to employ people and bring other people into the workforce, being able to produce a product. I know you've just started your own company. The logo's on the screen then, and so and I know you've got goals around that business that are around
Mm.
improving health and using AI and these things to be able to do that. If your success for your business is to have, and I'm not putting words into your mouth. You haven't told me what your measurement of success is. But if you say that your technology is going to make, you would like to make X number of people healthier through your technology over the next 5 years, if you do that successfully, that for you is success. If it
Mm.
happens, you will probably make money out of it as a byproduct. All right.
Yeah, yeah,
So
100%.
so
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 the
so
goal
the
is to
money,
solve a problem. If
correct.
you can
And it's the
solve the
same with
problem, that the success happens by
And it's
default.
the same with these health outcomes. Saying I want to lose 10 Ks or fit into that size dress, or I'm going to walk into the reunion and this girl that I fancied right through school and who completely ignored me is going to take one look at my abs and my six pack and fall in love with me all of a sudden, even though you're now 65 years old, or whatever it is, and your wife's going to be with you at the reunion. Yeah, that's the equivalent of making money a success, right? It's
Yeah, yeah, no, sure.
you're targeting the byproduct, not the actual measurement of
That
success.
100%. I used to. It's funny you used the perfect analogy that makes sense for me as well because you said like as a youngster, you're like I'm gonna drive a Lamborghini or have $1 million. I used to be like I'm gonna be a millionaire by the time I'm 21 when I was like 17 or something stupid. And my dad, bless him, would ask me how. Now he wasn't very good at coaching. So his how was a challenge rather than trying to get you to think and do things.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, hindsight being 2020, what might have got through to me at that point was like, that's fantastic. Superb goal. Let's plan out what you're going to do. Like what are you going to do to make your first 100,000? never mind a million. And then can you replicate that? And then make your next 100,000, and can you replicate that? Like build the increments in, because yeah, the goal is fantastic and sexy and everyone wants the goal. I still want to make a million. Like it's still a goal, but it's the reward that hopefully laying out the process and the journey, and focusing on the journey and making the journey the thing that I enjoy doing, will lead me there.
I guess the one step back from that might be to say, what is it that you're going to solve? What is it you're going to
Yeah.
deliver? What are you going to do that's going to benefit the world, that'll help you reach those milestones? So
So that's
what is it
actually
that
an interesting take. Sorry, just very interesting take, because we've sort of got onto a business mindset now, and I'm in the midst of this because I'm in the midst of a startup. So we're going through the entrepreneurial sort of conundrum of what problem can you solve? Like what do you have the skill or the intellectual property, or the know-how? What problem can you solve? Could we think about that? Or could we think about our health from that perspective? So if someone was to take stock of their health today, as it is right now, stare themselves in the mirror and be frank with themselves, could we say, pick a problem to solve, and then let's talk through how we're going to get there.
But let's talk about, I don't know if you've well, I will actually I've got a note to talk about this in one of our later episodes, this concept of first principles, right? So the way we tend to do things in the world today is there's so much information out there that instead of that, when we want to engineer something, we kind of look at what's already there, and then we see if we can improve it or we can change it. First principles says you don't do that. You actually go right the way back to what is the actual problem, or what is the
Yes.
actual process at the beginning, and start with that. So in terms of taking our analogy through this process that we're talking about now, if you say the problem is I'm overweight, or the problem is I have been diagnosed as being pre-diabetic, or the problem is, whatever it is, um, you're probably one step higher than the actual problem. So what you need to maybe do is strip that back down a little bit when you have that cold look at your mirror and say, what is the actual problem? Well, actually, the problem is probably that I'm eating the wrong foods.
Yes.
Or the problem is that I'm not active enough. Right?
Or both,
So
because
strip
usually it's
down to that.
both.
That's the basic problem. Being overweight, being unhealthy, being pre-diabetic, having having had a heart attack, what are these things? These are actually not the problem. They are the symptoms of the problem. So the problem comes back to the three things that we've done. It's either something to do with nutrition, or to do with activity, or to do with recovery. It's about managing energy at that
Yeah.
level. So if you turn around and say, right, what problem am I going to solve? The problem that I'm going to solve, let's say you're going to want to do this couch to 5K, whatever it is. The problem that you want to solve is that I'm not active enough. All right. So that's the problem. Now, let's talk about what are the goals, what are the steps that I'm going to do to solve that problem. How am I going to get myself to the point where I'm regularly more active? Or how am I going to get to myself to the point where I'm actually supplying my body with the right fuels at the right time to be healthy? And being healthy, by the way, from a food perspective, doesn't mean being unhealthy socially because you don't eat anything, right? It's about being able to bring all of those things together. And we'll talk about that in the nutrition episode. So strip the problem down to what is the core of the problem, and
Yeah.
make sure you can try to differentiate what is a symptom from what is the core. All right.
Yes. Yeah.
So and the core for most of us is around this energy usage, and I would say it comes down always to one of, at least more likely, a combination of the three things that we're going to be talking about:
Yeah. 100%.
energy
Yeah.
supply, energy demand, and how we recover.
Yeah.
And then so let's talk about, so again, I don't want to repeat too much. Let people watch this back if they need to and ask questions.
Yes.
The next thing that I think we've got on our list over here, and I'm going to hand this a little bit back to you, is we spoke about your health hierarchy pyramid.
Yep.
Um, And we basically said that, so I'm going to ask you to define that pyramid quite briefly. But what
Mhm.
we've said is the whole point of these deep dives is we're going to focus on just three bits at the base of that pyramid. So I'm going to let you talk through the pyramid and why you believe that we need to focus on the foundation before we worry about all the more detailed stuff above. So I'm going to hand this back to you.
Yeah, no, all good, all good. So this is my metabolic health hierarchy. It is inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it works off the same principles. Won't go into too much detail on that, but the basis of where I came from was I noticed that people tend, and we touched on this in the beginning, people tend to be distracted with things that move or optimize maybe the last 2 to 8% of the real health change. And so that's your top of the pyramid here. And things like tech, for example, and things like modern performance biohacks and learned things that aren't ancestrally appropriate and don't directly contribute to any of the foundational pillars. What I think is if we're coming at it from a biology first perspective, meaning that we want to appreciate and pay due diligence to the foundational reality of what we are as creatures, then we need to understand what has been evolutionarily consistent with us over time in terms of lifestyle factors. And then modern science is great in that we can, through our reductionist approach to things, now we can measure input, mechanism, output in a way that wasn't previously available. But if you look at human physiology, there's things that have been with us since time immemorial. For example, we know that humans have an essential nutrient requirement. There are things that we have to obtain from our diet because our body needs them. They're mandatory, but our body either doesn't produce them at all, or at least not in adequate quantities to meet our needs. So we have to get them from the diets. That's beyond energy. It's not just about energy balance. This is about basic components necessary for our metabolism. So essential proteins, essential fatty acids, essential vitamins, essential minerals. We have movement, right? We know that the human body doesn't do well without movement. Like I did an episode with Toby Swallow the short while back, and he brought up a fascinating piece about why trips and falls are such a problem for the elderly. So we talk about people 60, 65 and over, why trips and falls are such a problem for them. And it's not the breaks that they suffer per se. Like they could recover from the break, the body's still capable of healing the break. It's the being sedentary, the being immobile for a period of time because of the break. Their health falls off a cliff. And he gave some statistics around that, and it was quite frightening. But movement is central to what it is to be a human being. We have to move.
I think one of those stats, and I'm going off the top of my head now, so I'm probably going to be slightly out on the age, but I think something like somebody over the age of 80 who breaks a hip is very likely got 18 months left to live.
Yeah.
And it's for the exact reason that you mentioned. It's not the broken hip, it's the fact that they become that they're sitting in a bed and not moving, and the muscle sarcopenia just goes.
Yeah, frailty sets in at a rate of knots, and the health just falls off a cliff. Yeah. So movement is incredibly important, and movement is a complex thing as well. It's not just exercise, it's not just walking, it's not just running. It's a complex set of things, including taxing physical activity like exercise, things that require severe effort, and things that don't require severe effort, which is the majority of our being awake, little movements here and there. Sleep foundational recovery. In fact, that is the core component of recovery. So yeah, I think I used to think of sleep as just a reset, right? I was shutting the system down to give myself a bit of a reset. But sleep is actually an incredibly metabolically expensive process. It uses a lot of energy, and there's a lot of processes that happen during sleep that don't happen during waking hours that are incredibly important to your well-being. The glymphatic clearance, for example, hugely important to your cognitive function over the long term, and only happens during certain cycles of non-REM deep sleep. Doesn't happen at any other point during the day. You can't, like, if you're not getting that key component of sleep, you're not getting that key component of your brain's metabolism and clearing out all the sort of waste product or metabolites.
Are we going to do an episode on each of those three things?
Yeah. So those are the three we're going to focus on. Yeah, I do expand a bit into light exposure and into grounding because they're also important, but we won't go into that too much. Yeah, but that's my metabolic health hierarchy, and the basic premise, similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is you have to have the foundation in place first in terms of lifestyle, or at least that's what you should focus on before you then are enabled to move up a tier. And for me, the next tier would be looking at enhancements or augmentations, things that help you get the basics right or improve the outcomes thereof. And only when you've got that right, I'd say these bottom two tiers here account for about 80% of metabolic health. Then you can move up. Yeah, maybe even higher. But then you can move up into the stuff that we've learned how to do, like breath work, cold plunges, saunas, all have undoubtedly got benefit. Absolutely beneficial. I'm not disputing that for a second, but they're a learned behavior. They're not a evolutionary consistent behavior. And therefore they're a lower priority for me because you want to look after your evolutionary needs first.
And I would say, unless you've got the three down that we're speaking about into move from routine to habit, you're going to struggle with the rest because they're all energy demanding to be able to bring yourself through them. So you need to get the base of the pyramid into that habit stage. And then everything above that base level is then what takes you further and deeper and improves the health to some of the levels that we've seen in some of the podcasts and things. So I want to kind of just bring this to the close in terms of where we are. So we've said from our last point for today was that we wanted to say what was the power of the first step. And I think the first takeaway step that comes out of this whole podcast is you want to set yourself, you want to understand what your particular challenges in terms of what it is, and you want to make that a basic challenge. Is it, do you think you're eating wrong, eating too much, eating and not moving enough? So strip it down to what you think is the process or the behavior on your side that is the problem, and then set yourself a manageable, realistic, and measurable goal of what you think you want to do as your next steps, what sort of routine you want to create for yourself, and with the outcome, or with the goal being for that routine to become a habit. So that, I think, is the takeaway from today. What I will do quickly is just quickly trail a little bit of what our next episode will be about, because again, before we get into the real nitty-gritty, we've actually titled episode 2, How to Think Like a Scientist Without Being One. And the little blurb that we put in writing here is basically a little bit about this concept of first principles thinking, as I mentioned a few moments ago. So first principles thinking is one of the best ways to reverse engineer complicated problems and unleash creative possibilities, sometimes called reasoning from first principles. The idea is to break down complicated problems. So basically what I really want to do with the next episode is help people to understand, without becoming scientists, how to translate the messaging. So the
Yes.
best example I can always give people is you open up the Daily Mail one day and it tells you that scientists have said that 2 cups of coffee a day will make you live for 5 years more. And then you open up 3 more pages and there's another article that says scientists say that 1 cup of coffee a day will shorten your lifespan. All right. And now you've got these two conflicting messages in the same headline, in the same, or you scroll through Twitter or X or whatever it is now, and you see those two contradictory things sort of within the span of each other. So, right, we're all told trust the science. So now what science do you
Which
trust
one?
here? There's two bits of messages there. So really, what we're going to talk about next in the next episode is the very basics of how do you see a headline like that, and how can you critically evaluate the message behind that to know, is this worth following? Is there sense to this? How do I look at all these things about intermittent fasting and going to the gym and doing stretching and not stretching and eccentric exercise and concentric exercise and all the stuff we see as these little very good uh, uh, eye-catching blurbs and stuff? How do we evaluate that? How do we evaluate the science without going to university to get a science degree to be able to read it? What do I look at, and what do we do? And that's what next week, and that's what the next episode's all going to be about. And then we'll bring all of that together in the later episodes to specifically focus on nutrition, uh, activity, and recovery. So
No, that's good stuff.
I think that's a good place to end for today.
Yeah, no, I like that. Thank you very much, Neill. Appreciate that, and looking forward to the next episodes.
Brilliant.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching the episode. I hope that you found the conversation meaningful and informative, and I hope that it has empowered you with some tools and insights that you can take to tweak and improve your own lifestyle approach in pursuit of optimal metabolic health outcomes. If you've enjoyed the episode, and if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd like you to do me the kindness of please subscribing to the channel, giving it a like, maybe even giving it a share. Help to raise awareness and get the podcast in front of as many viewers as possible, because it is my passion to try and help as many people as possible to understand more of the nuance around metabolic health and how to tweak their lifestyle in pursuit of optimal outcomes. Also, if you have any constructive feedback, things that you think I could improve on, any critiques, any criticisms, please do feed them back. I give you my solemn word that I will take them seriously, and I will, to the best of my ability, work to improve and to give you a more refined and more targeted product as a result of your feedback. So I will take it seriously, and I'll do what I can to improve the show. But again, thank you very much for watching. Keep thriving.